All right, so it's 1 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Michelle Tam, and I'm the Partner Marketing Manager at ISA Cybersecurity. Thank you for joining us and the live panel to learn about the hidden beast. Email fraud is lurking in your supply chain. Before we begin the discussion, I'll share a few quick housekeeping notes. First, this event is being recorded and the recording will be made available after. Second, there will be time for Q&A at the end. Please put your questions in the Q&A feature. We'll do our best to get to everybody's questions, but if we do run out of time, we'll send a follow-up email with answers to your questions if we don't get to it. And third, as you can see, there's also a chat function. We encourage you to interact with the other guests here, but please ensure you only put your questions for the panelists within the Q&A button. I now have the pleasure of introducing our moderator, Enza Alexander, who is the Executive Vice President of ISA Cybersecurity. Enza is a seasoned IT industry leader with over 25 years of experience across the technology sector in finance, operations, sales, marketing, and professional services. Enza is passionate about helping clients better understand the positive impact and possibilities that business technology solutions can deliver. She has a long and successful track built on driving client solutions that are value-based. And in 2011, Enza was recognized as one of Canada's leading women in tech by IT Canada and Canadian Magazine. Pass it over to you, Enza.
Wow, I'm glad that you had the opportunity to introduce me. Thank you, Michelle, very much for that introduction. It's my pleasure today to moderate this conversation. I'd like to thank Supply Chain Canada and our panelists. And, we're going to jump into a poll to ensure that we at least gather some input from you, our audience. Thank you for joining us. You'll see, rate the confidence that you have in your supply chain security today. Take just a few seconds to look at that and provide us your input, and we'll share the results in just a moment. The topics today are real-world supply chain email fraud, examples of recent attacks and lures, evolving trends in threat actor capabilities, which are ever-changing. How can organizations secure themselves against supply chain disruptions? And grading, and understanding the risk in your suppliers. So, how are we doing with our results?
They're still rolling in, so I'll give it just 5 more seconds for everybody to answer.
Very good. As you all look at the answer to that, I will enable our speakers today, and we do have the pleasure of having an illustrious group, really cross-section and cross-function. Oh, so now we do have the results. Somewhat confident, most key suppliers. That's great. We're looking at the crown jewels of our organization. Terrified, maybe some work to be had in the terrified category, and we can alleviate some of those concerns today and start the conversation that will lead you into feeling more confident around some of the strategies that our speakers have and will discuss with us. So I'm going to allow our speakers to introduce themselves. We'll start with B, and then we will move to Robert and Dennis, and then, of course, Kevin will round us off. So B, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role.
Yeah, thanks so much, Enza, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I have extensive background in cybersecurity, cybersecurity compliance, both the technology and the business side, helping organizations with cybersecurity strategies, supply chain risk management, embedding security in vendor management processes, and as an advisor with Supply Chain Canada. Thanks. Robert?
Thanks, B, and thank you, Enza. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm super happy to be here. I'm Robert Stumpo, the Global Head of Information Systems at the Kronos Group, a global cannabis company. For the last 4 years, myself and my team have been building up everything from systems portfolio to cyber programs to the technical operations of the organization. Prior to Kronos, I spent some time in the public sector, both healthcare and government services, as well as insurance and marketing. So again, happy to be here, and I turn it over to Dennis. Thank you.
Great, thanks all for being here. Excited to be with you today. Dennis Ryan with a company called Proofpoint. So we take a people-centric approach is what we talk about when it comes to security, taking a look at who's being targeted in the organization, how they're being targeted, and ensuring that we provide security measures around those types of attacks. And supply chain has been one of those areas that we've seen over the last couple of years really erupt in business email compromise as one of the main risks that we see. So fake invoices that we'll talk about today and other forms of business email compromise. So happy to be with you. I head up a team here at Proofpoint that deals with our advanced technology solutions, and look forward to the Q&A as well. Over to Kevin.
Thanks, Dennis. Kevin Dawson here, President and CEO of ISA. In addition to, I guess, leading the direction and structure of ISA as a company, I'm also a large evangelist for security in general, but the security solutions and activities that we both see as an organization and also deliver to our clients. And email security and security awareness is one of the very, very high items on my priority list in terms of presenting forward to media, customers, and otherwise, just based on the prolific nature of it in cybercrime. So I'm excited about today and going through this as it relates to supply chain. Back to you, Enza.
Thank you. AKA my boss, and of course, Robert is a client, and Dennis, a great partner, and be a good friend as we pursue sharing this conversation with you, our audience today. So really our first question, and we're going to start with looking at what are the evolving trends you see in email fraud? And how does that relationship really work in your third-party risks that you see within your business? And so, let's get started with our very first question. And B, let's start with you. Can you help us understand sort of some of the strategies and approach?
Yeah, thanks, Enza. One of the things that we see is that email, it continues to be a medium that threat actors use to target supply chain practitioners, employees, and officers of organizations. And this continues to evolve. We've been very creative, leveraging news items to create a sense of currency so as to convince the recipients. It's either providing approval or authorization for payments, deploying or installing spyware, ransomware. And it's important that everyone understand that they will at one point in time or the other be targeted. It's not just the CEO or the CFO that email fraud targets. Everyone is a target. And sometimes it is using you as a vector to target a bigger victim. So one thing that I'll say is we don't want to be that person that opens up the door for a successful attack against your organization. Kevin, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would add that our research has shown that threat actors, in addition, some of the attacks are spray and pray, and that might go to your personal emails, which might be like a FedEx type thing, and they're just trying to get high numbers out there but threat actors more and more today are researching and spending a lot of time researching about a company's supply chain in some cases, or in a lot of cases, to figure out how to impersonate that supply chain and be very specific and accurate in their impersonation of those clients when they send these specific spear phishing attacks. And this may become from RFPs that are published that identify supply chains. It may come from award notices or people saying, hey, this is we deal with this company and proud of it. But they're really researching to get information to make their attacks very specific and very accurate and very tough to identify for the employees in these organizations.
Kevin, did you want to add something to that?
Myself or over to Dennis?
Sorry, Dennis.
So what I would say, a couple of things, appreciate what B said, because really when it starts with email, that is the number one attack vector that we see out there. It's the cheapest, it's the easiest for a bad actor to make that impersonation. And the supplier invoicing fraud is the most sophisticated of the BEC attack types. They're going after the invoice fraud. The other BEC attack types, shipment redirects, gift carding, payroll diversion, those are all out there. But what we see when we're looking at these each day, and we've stopped, by the way, since March of 2020, what we call a robbery in progress, but about $124 million in BEC attacks that have targeted our customers. And the attackers often use both the supplier impersonation and a compromised supplier account jointly in the same attack. And so when you ask about the trend, and what we're seeing is a lot of times what happens is an account gets compromised at the supply chain provider, and you don't know that. There's no way for you to know that. And the bad actor is very patient. They watch the back and forth that's occurring. They then, at the right time, when a payment's about to occur, oftentimes will copy in the thread of the legitimate email that's been going back and forth. And then they'll create a lookalike domain of your supply chain partner. And then someone in your organization, when they look at that email to say, oh, I've been asked to route this to a new bank or new information, they'll look and they'll see all the legitimate email has been copied in, and they'll miss that nuance of the lookalike domain. So that's one of the trends we've been seeing recently of how the bad actors are taking advantage of the supply chain and their ability to do that. And you can see across these different types of mediums, I mean, I joke about it, but it's like going past a strip mall in the US. You're going to see a donut shop and a nail salon. Basically, you're going to get hit by a supply chain threat. It's going to happen. It doesn't matter the size of your organization. And, you know, the majority of these are phishing or imposter. And you've got to have some type of access and know what's happening in your supply chain. The other that we see a lot of our customers do is demand that accountability of their supply chain by issuing them letters and talking about things like strong email authentication.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, very important. More information here.
Yeah, to touch base on this, this was a study Proofpoint did, a voice of our CISO. And what we did is we talked to 187 chief information security officers between March of 21 and the end of the year. And we asked them, what are those difficult things you're trying to figure out, how to sort out? You know, what can we do to try to help you out? Or what do firms like ISA and others do to, you know, where can they focus and help you? And they said BEC was top of mind, which makes sense. It's the number one loss out there, even ahead of ransomware financially for organizations. And then they said, we can't tell if our supply chain has been weaponized against us. How do we identify that? And then finally, all this can lead to ransomware. And you can see for the US and Canada, 39% of the CISOs listed as a top priority around supplier risk. So they between US and Canada, they're all scratching their head. How do we sort this out? So I think that's something that's really important for all of us to help our customers tackle.
Well said. Thank you. You know, moving on to question number 2, how do you evaluate, validate, and really audit the supply chain with your third-party suppliers to ensure that data is being transferred in a secure way? You know, Robert, let's start with you.
So thank you, Enza. I think it's important, I mean, not just a play of words, but, you know, it's a chain. And so keeping that in mind, we need to evaluate our partners' security posture. And that includes understanding how they evaluate their partners' cybersecurity. So we develop tactics that help ensure our suppliers' cyber practices and policies are sound and in place. In practice, you consider setting up a cyber checklist. It can be an evaluative tool when considering a partner. Have the partner demonstrate how they comply with regulations that matter to your business, or provide you with insight on how they're mitigating the latest vulnerabilities, and run cyber checks against your vendor pool on a regular basis. Due diligence nowadays with third parties is actually expected. And as a matter of fact, when I was looking to onboard a cyber partner for a vulnerability management program I was developing, we had our people, auditors, cyber people alike, actually as part of the selection, visit on-site visits with our potential partners in order to view their environment and the security operations and their practices in real time. One of those partners that we evaluated was our esteemed host, ISA. Enza, any comments on that?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. You know, I think what differentiated the evaluation of our organization to be able to provide managed and hosted services for your firm was really the fact that it was collaborative. The auditors showed up. Everybody knows auditors showing up in your office isn't necessarily fun, but it gave us an opportunity to truly understand the privacy and security, third-party risk, information, data, policy standards, and controls that were going to work for Kronos as we extended that partnership. We found it to be very comprehensive, and ultimately the sharing of the information on how we scored against other potential partners that remain nameless and faceless was also critical to helping us continuously improve and make sure that we're providing the information that our clients and stakeholders need. So, you know, thank you for that. B, maybe we can have you address this question next.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert and Enza. One of the things that we typically recommend is establishing a set of baseline fit for purpose based on the supply chain risks and the vendor size. And this is both for the clients, the customer, and the vendors. The requirements for security and data protection, requirements like Cloud Security Alliance Star, SOC 2, ISO 27000, PCI if payment processing credit card is involved, HIPAA for health, and so on and so forth. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's really a baseline that sets a matrix that helps ensure that the evaluation objectives are met and can be easily validated, not a set of checklists, and not something that is really too difficult for vendors to meet. These baselines form part of the sourcing requirements, RFX, just as Robert mentioned, and it's good to have a mechanism for third-party attestation. It's not at all the time that you can have internal or in-house auditors visit vendors. So having third parties attest that those requirements are met across the supply chain. As Robert said, it's a chain, so it's not just one end-to-end. We always feel that is important. It's also imperative to identify the inherent weaknesses in your processes, in the supply chain interactions, and address those weaknesses. We're talking about business email compromise, email fraud. If there are processes that can be moved away from email, yeah, is it possible to use a workflow portal and stuff like that? We also bring that as suggestions and all that. Without identifying those weaknesses, reliance on attestations may not be as effective or as efficient. And having risk responsibility matrix is also useful so that each party in the agreement, in the supply chain, understands what they should be doing, what risks they have to mitigate, what controls they are responsible for, and all that. Dennis, any thoughts on this? What are you seeing with your customers?
Yeah, appreciate that. So a couple things. One is, our customers are constantly searching for data to guide them. One step is having their procurement department ask the supply chain partners to fill out a form that would highlight the level of technical risk based on a number of network related questions. Security teams often help their procurement department with this. One of the more widely used questions in these surveys centers on what you just raised of email authentication. This is the most used attack vector. Bad actors, they can look publicly in the DNS and see, is your domain protected from impersonation? So companies like RBC have gone so far as to ask their supply chain to deploy email authentication. What I mean specifically by that is the protocol DMARC. DMARC is the acronym. So if you want to go impress your loved one tonight, I know Valentine's is over now, so you got to come up with something impressive. You're not going to have another dozen roses tonight. Teach them about DMARC and email authentication. So organizations like RBC and BMO use these to protect from impersonation, from somebody spoofing their domain. And in the same way, when they ask their supply chain to do that, then they've got that visibility and the confidence of exchanging email back and forth to know that what they're receiving from their supply chain has been authenticated. And when we offer controls like this, then it goes one step further in preventing that identity deception that can happen. We also look at risks that may be in the wild that, and I think this is the tough part for organizations, but they need to find vendors and those that can help them with this. What are the risks in the wild that can be surfaced about their supply chain? Meaning, are we seeing things like fraudulent websites? Are we seeing lookalike domain activity flying around the internet, acting as one of a supply chain partner? If your organization has the ability to tap into a vendor that can tell them perhaps they're seeing compromised account activity. So those are important pieces in that relationship between supplier vendor to be able to have that confidence that the email being exchanged is done in a secure fashion and that it's not coming from a compromised account or from a fraudster.
Right. Thank you, Dennis. I was going to say, don't try to go from Valentine's Day and roses to the next conversation unless you've got a path, but a good analogy and appreciate that. We're going to jump right into a second poll because one of the critical steps is really to understand and know where are the third-party suppliers in my supply chain. And so, how many organizations are in your supply chain today? Do you have visibility to them? Are they hidden in a corner of a logistical warehouse, etc.? So let's just take a moment and answer this poll. Michelle's going to share the results with us in just 10 seconds or so. Well, we'll be able to see, many of us have that visibility and that awareness. It's important to ensure that all of the stakeholders in our business, as this third-party risk continues to evolve and change, that we have visibility to who they are, where they are in our business. And then I think based on the question that we just answered, collectively, how are we addressing it? Do we have results, Michelle?
Yep, I can share them.
Terrific. So we'll see that, there are a significant number of us that have 50 plus in that supply chain. And B, I think you said it very well when you explained that, we are a chain and the impacts to one another in, any threat vectors could impact all of us or many of us. And so, let's move on to question number 3 for our panelists. And for question number 3, I think I'll conversely, as a third-party supplier, how do you make sure that the right security measures are taken proactively to protect clients that consume your services and products? And, I'm going to start with Kevin here. Please, Kevin, give us your perspective on this.
Thanks, Enza. Yeah, I mean, we provide these services to a number of customers. Some of them come to us to validate our controls, but in a lot of cases, we are doing things based on listening to our own experts in the company. I mean, this is all we do. We do have third parties that come in and do a validation. Things like a SOC 2 audit that we do annually, or gap analysis against various kind of certification bodies that we leverage. Back to kind of what Robert was saying earlier, and the exercise that was done with ISA way back when we first started, and having an audit come in and do that. But we're doing a lot of things to meet a number of these different requirements. Insurance as well has its own requirements. And then lastly, just kind of to make sure we have the right security measures in place. So I'm listening to the experts in our team that say, hey, these are the things we're recommending to our clients. We really need to do them ourselves. And so we are not the cobbler's son, so to speak. We absolutely practice what we preach in all of our controls. Back to you, Enza. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Double mute. Dennis, can you add a little bit to that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So, Kevin hit on something interesting. He said there towards the end that was an intriguing thing that a lot of organizations are facing right now, and that is around insurance, around cybersecurity insurance specifically. And so when you think about how do I make sure I'm taking the right security measures, we've seen the cyber insurance providers add to their questionnaire. It's gone from 20 questions to 200. That's not a joke. It's literally in the last year to 18 months. They've gotten more comprehensive, and things on there, what I talked about earlier, email authentication and the use of DMARC. So you've got to secure what you own, and it's your brand. And a lot of companies leave defensively registered domains unprotected from impersonation or spoofing, let alone their parent level domain and their sending domains. So one simple question to ask yourself there in the audience is, do you know who's sending email as you, and are they properly authenticated to send on your behalf? Because you can't just throw the information into a record, it's called the SPF record, to just say, hey, our third-party senders are out there, we're telling the world who some of our third-party senders are, and that should be good, we'll call it a day. You need to do the strong authentication. So that's the first piece, and that really hits on cyber insurance components. Another thing that they look for, and to ensure that you're taking the right security measures, is do you know if you've got compromised accounts, and do you know if any of your data is walking out the door? So with so many applications migrating to the cloud, and you've got to set up not only proper user controls, but you also need to monitor access and privilege to see if an account is compromised and somebody's extracting critical data, either to a shared drive, a personal address, a thumb drive. We've seen some try to pull this off on, say, a Microsoft Teams chat in order to exfiltrate some of your most important work, and that is your intellectual property. So threat actors, they want to watch that email activity, strike at the right time. If they can compromise an account, gain access where those that are privileged have access. So you need to be able to track that information and know what's happening and who's got access. Because as I talked about at the very beginning in my introduction, the world should be seen through the eyes of a people-centric strategy. Who's got access? Who's got privilege? Make sure that they're trained properly, and are they being targeted? Because if they are being targeted or their account gets compromised, that could lead to bad things. So you need to make sure the right security measures are in place to identify how personnel is being targeted in your organization so you can help prevent that. But up front, if you think of it sort of like a kill chain, start with email authentication, and then you work your way down into that funnel and that kill chain of moving from preventative measures into dealing with an issue when that occurs, which I think we're going to talk about as a teaser alert there here in just a little bit. So back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great lead into really our next question that I'm going to ask Robert to start us off with. People are at the core of the company's cyber strategy. What can we do to educate and empower our employees to help them recognize email fraud? how
Thanks.
can different departments, partner together and collaborate in order to make this happen? Robert?
Thank you. Thanks, Enza. I think, the need for organizational-wide cyber awareness and the importance of having everyone engaged in good day-to-day practices can't be understated. And we know that, but it's more than that now. Equally important is to focus on business activities that have elevated risk associated with them and collaborate with those functional owners to develop practice and policy and training aimed at empowering employees to take ownership of their risk and the associated controls. Cyber, IT, and business expertise work together, normally developing these training programs and practices that really target the people and target those functional areas. And I know we're going to hear more of that from B.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Robert. I think security awareness should include relevant examples that target the different departments and the different entities. It's really about speaking the people's language. That's when communication and really understanding occurs. So security related topics should also be included in the regular vendor client meetings so that all the stakeholders or the entities are aware of and reminded of the security culture and expectations. Well, generic security awareness training are cheap and easy to deploy. People tend to tune out once the message is not relevant to them or once they feel the message is not relevant to them. So it's really important to build an awareness program that is that has targeted information for the audience. And security policies and procedures should also be reviewed with various business groups. And it's important to ask the question, what are the gaps in our policies and procedures? How might we be, through those processes or through those procedures, exposing ourselves to things like email fraud? Dennis, would you like to share some thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, B. And I think you really nailed it on the head there as far as the types of security awareness training, because we've seen it before. People have joked about it. I have my 16-year-old sit down and plow through my annual training that's going to take 45 minutes to do, and it's the exact same training that we've had for the last 3 years. That's not very effective. So the heart of any good security program is a realization that the people are that last line of defense. And it goes back to what I said before, the people-centric approach. So know how a person's being targeted. And this way you can properly train them. And then they'll know if there's perhaps a supply chain partner that's risky to them or that they're engaged with, if we can highlight to them what it's like to get a credential phishing email, or are they being targeted by a bad actor that's doing some other type of style of attack. And you then give them these vignettes. And this is what we built. Just as an aside, we acquired the technology a few years ago, a company called Wombat. And the security awareness training we found that's most effective is this vignette. So at a time of education. So it's not punitive in nature, because you really want the employees to feel like they're a part of this. So whenever they click on that button that's up at the top of their screen, a fish alarm button or whatever you use, and that goes to the security team for investigation, then you can route that back to them and say, hey, thanks so much for being a part of our security program and posture here. You helped us stop something. That way, those employees feel like they are empowered and they're doing something great for the company. And when you educate through these targeted sessions that are short and specific to a role of how they're being targeted, they then absorb that information much more readily, and they don't feel like this is just the annual beating of a redundant training. You should also, as I mentioned, be able to report that phish or a BEC email, because that shortens the timeline for your security team and messaging teams to remediate or extract what could be hitting 3 or 4 other mailboxes. So a lot of times these aren't hitting 1,000 mailboxes in a large organization. They're very targeted. but they could be 3 to 5 people, say within finance. If one person reports it and you can quickly extract that from the inboxes, that's really important and that's very efficient. That way, you don't have to worry about that propagating. And one of the things that we learned with our research, and I think we're going to go into a slide here on some of this, but one bit of research that I'd share with you is with our security awareness training, we've seen our customers result in 1/3 fewer clicks on malicious links. So real world threats, not simulated attacks, but having 1/3 fewer clicks is pretty profound when you do the right kind of security awareness training.
Yeah, well said. You know, Proofpoint PSAT is a strategic partner of ours. We look at the technology, you'll see, and of course, these statistics are a couple of years old. Cybersecurity awareness, security awareness programs, tools, processes, and a people-centric approach is not necessarily new in our business. But it's interesting that, you know, the data and the statistics that we have shown an organization like ISA Cybersecurity the ability to decrease the phish failure percentage and increase the awareness and knowledge of individuals within those organizations, within your firms, our firm, how to detect the bad guys. More importantly, when they fail in multiple languages, we're going to enable them. You know, we should all be enabling our teams to be able to understand the sophistication, right? It's not one size fits all. It's training the, you know, IT and power users around their threat vectors and really mapping this service into your people-centric approach so that it maps to your people. You know, Dennis, tell us just a little bit more about PSAT, as I think it really does address a lot of these issues.
It does, Enza, thanks. So as I mentioned, you know, the acquisition that we had made, the reason we selected that organization was the group coming from educators and those that really studied the way the brain works and interacts with email, you know, that heightened sense of urgency. If you get an email from your boss's boss, it makes you want to move quickly or answer it almost like you've been asked such an important question. So there's a sense of urgency. I need to get back in touch with them. So how do you alert people to those nuances that come from what could be perceived as, is this really the CEO, the CFO, or an executive vice president in the organization? And look at me, I'm being asked to help them out in some way. We'll take a look at those things and we really dissect that email to determine how is the best way to train somebody, especially if they're being targeted in a specific way, so that when they get that email that has a sense of urgency or to reroute payment, or hey, I've got, you know, a new address here for my bank, reroute my payroll, that they'll take a look and just examine a few things. Does that have a different reply to on it? Or I'm looking at this on my mobile phone. I can't really see all the information like I do on my laptop or when I'm at work. So how do I mouse over this and make sure, like, is this link in here even legitimate? You know, you can mouse over a link and just see, is that address even linked to the vendor that's sending me the request, or is it going off to some other website? So these are the kind of things that they learn and they just become more aware, become a little bit more sensitive to it. And thankfully they also educate their parents, because I know a lot of us on this call are probably IT specialists, help desk for our parents as they get happy clicking from any given email that flies into them. So.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the additional input. You know, let's move right on to question number 5. And please, as our participants, our audience, put your questions in our Q&A so that, you know, we can address them. You know, if you've believed that you've been exposed or breached, and a third-party supply chain attack is at the core of that, what do you do next? And, you know, let's really start with Kevin, as far as, you know, you are a third-party supplier, and help us understand your perspective on this question, Kevin.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would start with is you're probably going to be notified by somebody, either your team or the third-party supplier, that something might have happened, and whomever that is, thank them for bringing it forward, because there is often a reluctance to bring these things forward, and organizations need to create that culture of security and culture of not being afraid to identify. Because in some cases, these breaches start with somebody making a mistake. And so if they don't bring it forward, the mistake was on. The other thing I would say that's critical in any of these incidents that might happen as a third-party supplier or from your third-party supply chain is enacting your incident response planning. And if you don't have an incident response plan, building one out now so that you can enact it should something happen. They are crucial to defining the processes, the things you're going to do when and if you identify a third-party supply chain attack on your as a supplier yourself or from one of your supply chain. Things like your breach notification practices. Who do you have to tell? Who are you going to tell? Who do you engage? Your escalation. Do we engage our insurance? Do we engage a third party? Do we have a retainer with a third party that we can call because we've had a breach, or do we have sufficient skills on staff to take this on? Do we involve a breach coach and or PR, and ensuring that all those things are documented before you have any incidents, so that you can implement that incident response plan, and making sure that a lot of the things that you have as terms of best practices are embedded in your contract language and SLAs and things like that, so that people know, contractors, your suppliers, they know what you're going to do in the event of an incident that either is at your route because you're the supply chain, or that you're going to enact as your part of your supply chain. So those are the initial things I would talk about, or I would suggest in terms of a suspicion that you've been exposed to a breach and what to do. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And as you said, the first thing to think about is the Scout's motto: be prepared. It's important. It's really necessary, I'll say, to prepare for incidents before they occur. Incidents will occur. Do we have an incident response plan? And as the organization, share that with all the relevant parties. And the incident response plan should have supply chain considerations, the agreements, and ensuring that they are pragmatic. So it's something that can be tested, tried out before the incidents occur. And really, what should you do first? This is a bit counterintuitive, because unfortunately, people don't want to keep their hands up to say, hey, I dropped the ball, I messed up. But what you should do first is report the incident as soon as possible, so that the cybersecurity SMEs can assess, contain, and then take necessary steps to recover from the incident, or if it is a breach, the breach. So I'll say, hey, first thing, just develop the courage to report there's an incident and stay engaged throughout the incident response process. Dennis, do you have some tips to share with our audience?
Yeah, thanks, B. A couple of things I would say is, and you two have hit on it a bit, is have those tools in place to determine the activity of what occurred. What was it? Compromised account? How did that occur? Like earlier in the discussion today, I talked about how a supply chain provider could be hitting you with a compromised account to get you to reroute. Well, they could also be sending you something that's got a malicious attachment or URL. So to be able to determine that, we often hear, that simulations were never run ahead of an event, which, it's bad practice to assume it can't happen here. So, things like doing regular system backups, no unsupported software or systems within the network, regular patching, monitoring, logging of access and suspicious activity, that's very critical. Have separate credentials for privileged access, and then limit local administration right access. Strong password policies are important as well. So, one of the things that is important is, as you start down this road, is to say to yourself, do we know where our risk is from an information protection perspective? How could data walk out the door? What could happen here? What could happen via breach? Or was it a person that just had bad intent, that it's a disgruntled employee that's going to walk out the door and they're going to try to take something or leave something on the network as a little surprise? Or is it just somebody that did something and they didn't realize it was bad? So having tools in place to understand that up front is also important, because then you would have a log of what occurred or what potentially led to that. Because, you know, if something has happened, it's a heck of a lot easier to run forensic on it is if you've taken the upfront preventative measures. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are lacking, is they just haven't even tested, tried, looked at anything that may leave a trail for them. So important to have. Otherwise, Kevin's going to pull out his beard hair trying to help you out on the forensics after something's happened.
Well said, Dennis. Thank you. So bad practice, moving into really best practice, which is, the next area that we'd like to cover in our conversation today. And really, when we look at the questions that we've addressed, and I'm going to obviously, Robert, we're going to start with you. But what's the single best practice tactic that you would recommend to our audience to mitigate email fraud and supply chain risks?
So thank you. And I really wish there was one single thing that we could do. And I think it's a combination of best practices. I know Dennis probably said it most accurately earlier when he talked about protecting your own brand and the things that you do, internal to protect yourself, your organization, and your data. So you want to ensure your own architecture and best practices are sound, particularly when it comes to access controls. Things like privileged access management, zero trust architecture are a great place to focus. B, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert. I say one single thing. First thing, read your emails. Don't click on links arbitrarily or open files arbitrarily. Read the emails. If it's strange, then it is strange. Treat it as such. Don't be too trusting. Read your emails. Dennis?
Yeah, very important. You're right. If it doesn't walk like a duck and talk like a duck, then it's probably not a duck. So, you need to have something that helps authenticate that. Make sure if what's coming in the door has been authenticated, is that legitimate or not? So that's why I really feel like DMARC is so critical to that. Too many times we see companies rely on helper apps that kind of sit off the gateway, or they buy into some of the new tech and says, oh, your gateway's not strong enough, add this, and then bolt this on and bolt this on. And then you've got a whole bunch of different systems out there that you really aren't having a cohesive threat protection platform to look at that all works together, of authentication on the inbound, and then that ability to determine, is this legitimate? Is this containing a malicious attachment or URL, and who's being targeted? So, and then finally, as we talked about today on supply chain, are legitimate supply chain partners being impersonated? You've got to have some type of visibility into that supplier risk. And then, doing something like banner advertising on there, or banner warnings on there specific to suppliers. You might think about that as well. I think that could be powerful for your employees.
Kevin?
Yeah, I've been listening to all our great speakers today, and one of the things that's kind of come to thought is we talked about what typically in a lot of organizations they treat as kind of two separate areas. One is what I'll call mail hygiene and email hygiene, and the other is awareness, security awareness and training, and giving people the ability to report potential malicious emails or false emails or phishing emails. And this is one of the areas in terms of kind of one specific recommendation that more than any other kind of domain in security that we at ISA believe is critically important to combine those two, to have them both in a integrated solution. And we've seen it in many times in the past with clients. It's a challenge when clients have separate solutions. They have users reporting phishing in one solution, and it comes back and it is an actual phish email. Well, now they've got to go to a different solution, their email hygiene solution, to either look for that same email elsewhere or put blocks in or say, I don't want to accept this domain anymore. And it creates a lot of additional effort and things get missed. And so it's an area that I'm very passionate about, that companies look at a complete and integrated solution that has both those components in there. And we're very, very proud with our partnership with Proofpoint and have kind of Canada's first and only managed email and security awareness SaaS solution, combining both of those and making it both cost effective and efficient for providing our customers that protection. So that's one key area. I mentioned earlier kind of incident response planning. That goes without saying. Every organization should have that. They should test those incident response plans annually through tabletop type exercises and simulate an incident. And then as it relates to your supply chain and relates to kind of the conversation we've had today, establish very clear rules with your and directions and policies and security measures that you want to have with your suppliers, and test them and look for compliance on them, or look for them to provide some evidence of compliance through other third parties. And eventually we're all a supply chain to somebody else. Prepare to have the same done of you. And be prepared to be able to answer those questions when asked of you as you kind of supply your customers and constituents. So those are the things I'd add as kind of a wrap up and important in this conversation.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for that. We're about to move to our Q&A portion of our conversation today and our panel discussion. Maybe just before I do that, I guess to summarize, if your boss sends you an email and says, go buy me iTunes cards, chances are, I hope I can say iTunes in a public forum, chances are that might not be real, and you may want to look deeper. A lot of really good information today. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insights and your recommendations. I'm going to ask questions, and I will direct it to our panelists, and please, as our co-panelists, jump in if you have something important that our audience can benefit from. So, Robert, I'm going to look to you for this one. You talked about the evaluation of partners and the checklist. Can you give just a couple of examples on, what are some of a few key items that should be on that checklist as you evaluate your partners and your third-party suppliers?
Thanks, Enza. So as we talked about earlier, it's not always practical to send a whole audit team out to a potential partner to do that evaluation. It can be expensive. And so what is a common practice that is used in a diligence process in partnership with your procurement teams and your legal teams, how we do it is we have a checklist that we put up front to potential vendors, and that asks for vendors to demonstrate certain things. Are they able to provide SOC reporting on a regular basis? Anything from what compliance they are subject to, what regulations they're subject to even their practices in hiring security staff and onboarding folks, their incident response, their data center locations. These are all examples. We flood our checklist with anything and everything. And then we review it for what's relevant. And then we may focus in on key areas where we may want to explore more with our partners. But the general best practices and their cyber hygiene is what you're trying to get at when you do this evaluation. And I hope that helps. It's a great question.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Maybe we'll just move on unless one of our panelists would like to add to that.
I'd just say, I raised it before, RBC and others are doing that. They're creating letters out to their supply chain partners and stating things like DMARC, strong authentication. And I think others are putting in a checklist to use simple things like MFA, multi-factor authentication. What are you doing around cloud account access? Use endpoint detection and response tools. Do you secure your backups? How do you secure those? You know, just to understand that general hygiene, like Robert says, if you're not going to be able to go do pen testing on every single partner, especially smaller organizations, you need to understand how they operate. And some would even say, well, you know what? I'm going to need to invoice you and send everything back and forth on Gmail. That's not so great, you know, so let's talk about exactly how we're going to exchange the invoices and information there. So just important to have some of those questions answered.
Thank you. Yeah, policy, standards, and controls.
Yep.
So when we, you know, there's the DMARC conversation continues to evolve, couple questions. And so I'm going to pick on you again, Dennis, to get us started. But, you know, when we get to the DMARC policy where P equals reject, what is the business risk that is decreased?
Yeah, to answer two ways. It's what's nice is there's a business risk that's decreased, and that is your identity being controlled by somebody else, because if you've not locked that down with a policy of reject, then anybody can spoof your domain and act as you in the wild. And so what diminishes is overall brand impact. You're not, you know, you can go to your board and say, we have done everything possible to mitigate the risk of somebody taking on our identity. We've locked down all of our third-party senders. Only legitimate senders can act on our behalf. And we've even gone so far, and some tools allow you to do this. We do this because we think it's so important, is we also search for, on a regular basis, lookalike domain activity. And so we also mitigate the risk of somebody creating fake domain sites or creating a lookalike as us. So that risk is decreased over there from a brand perspective. One thing that I think people have lost sight of is what goes up, that's a good thing, is your email deliverability, because then Gmail and Bell Canada and TELUS know who your legitimate senders are. So they're going to deliver all your good email. They don't have to wonder, is this really good or is it bad, acting as Canadian Tire or whoever. The other thing, just real quick, that I'll throw out there that has been ratified, and I saw Circle ID just blogged about this, I believe it was either last night or today, and that is what's called BIMI, or brand indicators for marketing. So imagine each of these logos you see on here for Supply Chain Canada, ISA Security, Proofpoint. Put your logo of your company in the avatar of your email. Well, you can now do that with doing email authentication. So now you're not only mitigating risk, but you're improving your digital brand by putting that in the avatar of the email. And you can only do that if you've gotten to this policy of quarantine or reject with DMARC. So it's got a double effect: reduce risk, protect the identity, improve deliverability, and your overall brand in the market.
Well said. You know, just staying on that topic for 30 seconds longer.
Okay.
You talked about the importance of DMARC. One of our questions is that our audience is worried about blocking legitimate emails because they don't necessarily know if my supplier has deployed DMARC correctly. And so how do I ensure, or how can I get the needed visibility that I need to do it right? You know, Dennis, I'm going to ask you to comment on that, and then B, maybe you can jump in as well.
Sure, I'll make this quick. So a couple of things. There's two things at play with DMARC. So number one, authenticating your own third-party senders. Make sure you get that right. You've got to have full visibility. If you just use a basic DMARC solution that sits out in your DNS and it pulls the Bell Canada, TELUS, Gmail results, that's helpful. They're very important, but that's the consumer mailbox world. Not all businesses operate based on what Hotmail is telling them. You've got supply chain providers as well as your own systems using B2B tools. So you've got to have not only consumer results for your third-party senders, but also business results, your B2B. That's why we use our 8,000 gateways to also help us out. On the inbound for your suppliers to ensure they're doing it right, you've got to have visibility. So when you deploy this authentication solution, does your gateway or do your tools that you have, can it identify if a supply chain provider of yours is perhaps missing something in their DMARC record? So you've got to have that visibility. So those are really key to make sure you get that right and you don't block legitimate traffic. B, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely correct, Dennis. One of the things I'll say is that comes as part of the due diligence when onboarding the suppliers. So we are going to get into a business relationship. These are some of the technology requirements that should be in place. Yeah, for some smaller, medium-sized businesses, it will be working through and supporting them to get there. But at least there's that roadmap created to get them there. Thanks.
Sounds great. Again, good information that we can share with our supply chain audience and practitioners that have joined us today. Robert, and maybe Kevin, actually, I will start with you. And what other tips can you share? One of our questions is from the audience, so that the supply chain practitioners can further embed good email security practices in daily tasks. You've provided some good input. What else would you say that people should consider and our audience may value?
Well, I think it was mentioned by B earlier, is just that whole notion of being aware and being present in specifically email we're talking about today, and making sure that your users are reading through the emails and identifying. And that starts with training them on how to identify those issues, and notice the anomalies and things that don't make sense. I think, like you said, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is, and therefore kind of just disregard it. Again, the tools help to control that. So the tools we've talked about, the tools and processes, the tool without kind of the people and process to manage it is just one piece of it. So you need to have those peoples and processes to handle those things. And as it relates to email, both as we talked about, both inbound and outbound. Don't be the propagator of something outbound through a compromiser yourself. So that would be the last kind of piece I would say in terms of email security practices that individuals can use and also organizations. The last thing I would say is really you can have organizations come in like us and evaluate your email security. We do a lot of red team exercises as an organization, as I know you're aware, Enza. And it's interesting in doing so, we oftentimes, on behalf of clients or in the delivery of that service, register those lookalike domains. And it's surprising to see how long it takes for those organizations to come back and challenge the fact that we've registered these domains and it's not their organization. We had one recently that for a service we delivered last August, we got sent a notice in January of this year that they were finally questioning a domain we registered. Now, we did it with their approval. We did it because they asked us to as part of a red team exercise, but the organization or the people at Power that look at these things, it took almost 5 months for them to identify. So have an organization can come in and actually check your email security processes and policies and things, controls that you've enabled and validate them specifically.
Terrific. We have hit the top of the hour. Robert, did you want to add just a quick little bit to?
Sure. Just to put the exclamation point on what Kevin is saying, at the beginning in terms of the security awareness for your team. I think that's always going to be key, that they understand not only what they can look for, what they need to look for, but how to action it. And we in cyber and IT partner with them for that route, so that they can pay attention and they have somewhere to go when they have the questions or the concerns that they can raise up. So I just wanted to add that.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers today. Thank you to Proofpoint and Supply Chain Canada for enabling us to have this conversation. It is important. Best practices does not include having, what did you say, I believe, Dennis, your 16-year-old, do your security awareness training for you. We've all gathered, tidbits of information. Our audience, our illustrious speakers are available. Please let us know if you'd require, any additional information from any of us today. Of course, you can reach out to Supply Chain Canada as well. That can connect you with the right individual to ensure that we're sharing. Cyber is a sharing opportunity for all of us within our businesses, within our personal lives. And we truly appreciate your time today. To our speakers, well done. It has been my pleasure to lead this conversation and moderate. And without further ado, I will turn it back to Michelle Tam, our host. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Enza. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for participating in the Q&A. Just before you leave, we'd love to hear your feedback on this event. There will be a 2-minute survey that appears in your browser as you exit from this webinar, and would really appreciate if you could take those 2 minutes to complete it. If you complete the survey and would like to receive the gift card, as a token of our appreciation, you'll have an option to indicate that for a $25 Uber Eats gift card. Thank you, and have a great day. You can always reach out to us at info@isacybersecurity.com if you have any further comments or would like to get in touch with one of the panelists.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.